Welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry, and today we're going to go over how to read our rulers properly. Okay, so I printed my ruler onto a piece of paper to try to make it a little more visible what I'm going to be trying to show you, because when you're looking on a ruler and seeing your mat underneath, it can be distorted just a little bit. So I wanted to be able to show you some lines to help you out a little bit in reading your ruler. So in between our ruler, we will have our longest lines. Our more solid line is our inches. So we have an inch here, and we have our inch line here. So between these lines, our next longest line, right here, is our 1/2 inch. From there, our next smallest line, so you'll have your thickest longest line that goes all the way across your strip of your ruler, your 1 inch, and it goes up and down 1 inch. Then your next is your 1/2 inch. Your next longest one is your 1/4, and we have a 1/4 here. But if we're looking up from the 3 to the 4, and I know this printed backwards, but if we were looking up from the 3 to the 4, and we go 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, then you would have your 3/4 mark. Now in between each quarter is an 1/8 mark. There are 8/8 in an inch. So here we would have, we'll just pretend this is a number 1 and this is a number 2. Just for the sake of reading our ruler today. So if a pattern told me that I needed to cut 1 inch and 1 inch and 1/4, well, I should have pretended this was 1 down here and this is 2 and this is 3. We'll go with that. Okay, so if I needed to cut 1 inch and 1/4, I would start down here. I would be at my 1 inch right here. So if I needed to cut 1 inch and 1/4, I would go up to here with my fabric. I would line it up with all these dashes going across. And with my 1/4 mark on this ruler, not only does it give me a dash across, but there's like a white line underneath here connecting so that I can line my fabric up nice and neat. If it told me 1 1/2, then I would go to my 1 inch and then up to my 1/2 inch and cut. Where people really start to have a problem is when it's 1 2/8, or 2 2/8, or 3/8, or 5/8, and 7/8. Your most common is going to be not very usually is it an 1/8, but usually you're going to see 7/8, sometimes 5/8, and sometimes 3/8 will be your more common ones. So your very smallest lines on your ruler here would be your 1/8. Then you have your 1/4, but your 1/4 is actually your 2/8. Then your 3/8. Then your 4/8, and like I said, most of the time, you're not going to see 2/8 written in a pattern. You're not going to see 4/8 written in a pattern. They're going to come up as a 1/4 or a 1/2. But then you have your 5/8. Your 6/8 would be your 3/4, and then your 7/8. And you're going to see quite often the 7/8 is your most common one that I see in patterns when I'm doing cutouts. And the reason why you see that most common is with your half square triangles, which are often seen as HSTs in initials, because when we're cutting and we're using two squares and we're going to do a diagonal line from corner to corner in our square, and then we're going to sew those, we're going to make a line diagonally, which you've seen, and then we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch on each side of that line. If you want your half square triangles to come out to 4 inches, you would cut your squares at 4 7/8. And then after we've done the cut on this line, then we would square them up. So, now that I've shown you that, how to read your ruler, and that's just your basic reader ruler, I'm going to use some paper. Never use your rotary blade, your new ones, on your regular cutter to cut with on paper. So I have some older, I'm going to lift this up. Sorry for the shaking, but I'm going to adjust my camera so you'll be able to see me. Half the battle in tutorials is making sure everybody can see what you're doing and explaining to them. Okay, so I got to move this over this way where you'll be able to see it, because I'm right-handed, so I'm going to cut from this side. What am I looking for? I just had my ruler just a second ago. I've got a bunch of rulers over here because I want to show you some different kinds. Now, back a long time ago, Easy Rule was one of your more popular rulers. I sometimes still like it because it's a quicker reference if I'm doing cuts. This one I keep over at my sewing table because it fits nicely on my turntable mat. Needs replacing. That thing is old and it's gotten really hard on the surface, and it doesn't cut as well affects my cutting. But anyways, I keep this one over at my sewing desk, and I also keep a little one. I've been changing over to Creative Grids. I really like them because they have a non-slip material on the 1/4 inch and over here on the 1/2 inch. And and you'll see these dots that on the Creative Grid rulers, that when you have your ruler down and you press on those dots, this doesn't slip. It's not moving. But if I take the pressure off, I can move my ruler. Let me make sure I'm getting that in the camera properly for you. So there are these dots. Let me see if I can grab one of my little bit larger ones. Put some paper under here so you'll be able to maybe be able to see this a little bit better. It's kind of hard to see that. Well, maybe that does a little bit of a visual for you. I'll have to check it afterwards and see. But you have these dots here. It goes around the 1/4 inch of my ruler. This is a nice 6x6 ruler that I use for squaring up HSTs and doing other things. These smaller rulers I tend to keep over at my sewing desk so that as I'm sewing I can just go over to my mat and, you know, square things up. And I have a wool pad and a small iron over there so I can do a lot. Even when you're sewing, you want to remember, though, to get up every half an hour, to kind of stretch, walk around a little bit, because sitting for too long is not healthy. Anyways, so we have these little dots under here. With a Creative Grids ruler, and the reason why I love them is that anytime that you put pressure where those dots are, this ruler does not move. It stays stable. I can move the paper, But I cannot move that ruler. As soon as I take the pressure off, if I put my fingers anywhere else, I can easily move my ruler around and adjust it for lines where I need it. Put pressure on those dots, that ruler doesn't move. And often you'll hear someone say, well, you know, with these, if you just put pressure on them, they don't move. And that's pretty much true. But you know for sure if you put fingers on any of the dots, your ruler's not going to move. Another handy little tip about rulers, well, I've got this ruler here, is that when you're holding your ruler, you definitely want to keep your fingers away from the edge. So when you're cutting, you're not going to nick your finger. I've done that. It's not fun. Stitches are never good. But if you put your pinky over the edge of the ruler, but up against your ruler, once you have it lined up, once you know where your cut's going to be, put your pinky over here, especially with the smaller rulers, because I've shown you with a long ruler how you can put a little weight on the end of the ruler to keep it stable. But if you're using a longer ruler, you want to be moving your hand, stopping your cutting, moving your hand up, because your hand needs to be level with your cutting to make sure that the ends of your ruler doesn't shift. So with smaller rulers, I put my pinky over on this side, putting pressure down on my ruler, it's not going to slip. Now these are older rulers, my Easy Rules. They used to slip all over the place. I put some grit dots on the bottoms of them. Seaside, we have these available. They're not very expensive at all. I think you get 24 large ones and 24 small ones in a package or something near that. So a package goes quite a long ways. And I use the larger dots up in some areas, and I use smaller dots in between markings so that they don't visually distort my vision when I'm trying to use a ruler. As the years have been going on, I've been replacing my rulers with the creative grid rulers because there's a lot more markings on here, and I'm able to pick more things up, and I find it very handy. One thing on square rulers that's really neat, and a lot of times people don't notice it, but your square rulers will have this line that goes diagonally on one side of your ruler. This really comes up handy when you're squaring up blocks, whether it be a small one like this. I have a new Creative Grids square up ruler coming in. I can't wait. I'm excited. This one, I had to put a sheet of this non-slip plastic, and it always lifts up and peels off. It comes off really easy, and it frustrates me. So I can't wait to get my new ruler in. It's coming in this week. I'm so excited. And this sometimes will still slip on fabric. It's not doing it on paper, but on fabric, sometimes it slips on me. So I have, you know, this size is 12.5 by 12.5. It's a real nice square up ruler for your end result 12 by 12 blocks, which we know that we need to leave 1/4 of an inch always on each side for when we're putting them together, because or 1/2 inch rather on each side of a block extra, so that you'll end up with a finished 12-inch. So when we're squaring up, and we're going to go over the squaring up in a different tutorial, but I just wanted to point out that you have your line here, which helps you when you're squaring up a block. Whether I'm squaring up a block that's small, or I'm squaring up a little bit larger, 10-inch, with the 12.5 inch, I can square up quite a bit. Then I have my smaller ones for smaller blocks, so I don't have to bounce around a heavier, bigger ruler. Sorry, my brain. But I also have a very large one. This one is 20.5 by 20.5. This is what I use when I'm doing a large quilt. it just makes my cuts less. You can use the 12.5 by 12.5 easy enough on a quilt, but when I'm doing a quilt and I'm squaring it up, which I'm gonna show at a later time. I'm working on a quilt now at the moment, doing my finishing quilting on it, and once I get to the point where I'm going to do the binding, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a squared up quilt tutorial for you. But when I'm and I don't have this flat because of my mats, darn it. But when I'm doing a squaring up, which you'll see later on, you can square up your corner, your side, your top, and then you have your sides that you need to get your straight line. So I butt up my 6 by 24 ruler and make sure that it's exactly flush on this end. I'll feel it, make sure that it's flush. I even have like a piece of cardboard that I push up against here that I cut out of a cereal box. These measurements will not match up from this ruler to this ruler. Every manufacturer is a little bit different. So when you pick a ruler to do your cutting of pieces to piece a quilt, stick with the ruler that you start with. I check what my measurements are going to be, and I make sure that the ruler that I pick is going to cover all the cuts that I need to make with it. Then I stick with that ruler for cutting all my pieces. I do have a larger Creative Grids, and I love this one because sometimes I've got to make a lot of cuts that are 10.5 inches or, you know, 7.5, 8.5, whatever, for doing like tote bags, other things that I need a larger width. This one is 12.5 wide by 24 long. So this one comes in really handy for big stuff. I don't use it as often as I use all my other rulers, and it's hard to get it in the camera. This is a very big ruler, and it's one that I use once in a while for things, not an everyday ruler, but it's nice to have when you get to the point that you can afford a few more rulers. Anyways, that's kind of off to the side of what I was talking about, which our main goal today is talking about how to read our rulers and how to use our rulers to do things like diagonal cuts. So I'm going to start by cutting this 2.5 inches wide by the length of my paper. And I'm using paper because paper is a little bit easier to look at underneath the ruler. The white paper shows up better. Now let's see. My paper moves pretty easily, so sometimes it's going to get a little bit off. But I'm going to square that up. And when I'm going to cut, even if this was on fabric, I'm going to make sure that the bottom of my fabric is on a solid line. So I'm going to bring this ruler down so that it's on the very solid line and straight across on the bottom. Now normally this would be your fold line on your fabric. And then I'm going to adjust the ruler so that that solid line is on the bottom. I probably should have used cardboard for this. But we have paper, and that's what we're using. So it'll just take me a second to get this so that it's lined up because my paper likes to move. And I didn't have any cardboard on hand, so paper it is. Now this is, like I said, this is an older cutter. I don't use this on a daily basis, but I will use this when I'm cutting paper. And the reason being is I don't throw out old blades when I'm done with them. If they get to the point where they're not cutting my fabric going through one time, it's frustrating. I don't like it. And it can slow down my cutting big time. But I don't like to waste things. So I've kept a lot of my old cutters This one I thought was going to be a nice cutter, and you know, because the way it hangs up and holds in my hand. But I have arthritis in my hand, and this is not very ergonomical. But because I don't use it very often, and I only use this one for cutting paper, and I know because this is the only one that I have in my house that is this color in this shape. So after I take a blade out of the one that I use for fabric, I stick it in here. I also have a different one, a different color, different type, that I will use older blades in for cutting when I'm going to cut something that has batting in it, or I'm cutting fleece, or I'm cutting felt. Those will dull your blade much quicker, so I use an older blade. I can, you know, I know it's going to cut through it. I might have to do a couple of cuts to get through it nice and clean, but why waste a nice blade when you can reuse some of your blades? And then I even have a blade saver, which I'll show you at a different tutorial, that you put the blades in, and when you do your chain piecing, you can just go through and cut your threads between your pieces. And I'll be showing that at a later time. That has nothing to do with today. Just how to use up some of your old blades. Oh, now that I squared that up, my two papers aren't together. Wouldn't you know it? All right, let's go back. We're going to be cutting these 2.5 inches wide. I want to make sure that my solid line down here is straight across the bottom of my paper. And then I'm going to adjust and make sure that I have this. And sometimes I just have to tap it a little bit with my fingernail to move the ruler over. It's on paper, so it's not cooperating the same as it would with fabric, don't you know? And so, okay, I have it 2.5 inches. I'm cutting 2.5 inches because I want to end up with 2-inch pieces after they were sewed together. So I know I got to have 1/4 inch on this side, and I got to have 1/4 inch on this side for my seam allowance. So 2.5 inches will give me my 2-inch pieces. And I make my cut. Okay. Take those two apart. Now you always want to check your piece. And this would be the point when we would take the selvage off. So we would line it up on a line on our mat. And you can do it that way, and then, you know, line your ruler up with that solid line, making sure that it lines up at the top and lines up at the bottom. However, I know that this, and I've got to cut sideways because of the way that I'm situated here, so that you'll be able to see what I'm doing. The other way to line this up, and you can do this with larger pieces as well. So I know that I want this to be 2.5. I'll go a little bit past on the bottom, past the solid line. And I'm going to line it up so that I have 2 lines. One, my solid line for 1 inch, and then I have your 1/2 inch lines are quite often lighter colored, not as thick, not as filled in as your 1 inch. And you can line your piece up between those 2 lines. And I know I've got 1/2 inch. I'm going to go down a little bit more because I'm going to need a little bit more of this piece of paper. Okay, I've got that at 2.5. So I know that this is straight on this side, this is straight up in here, and I can make my cut. And don't, you know, because I cut too fast, I made my ruler slide over and I did not get a straight cut. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to line this up again. I'm going to pay more attention and not try to be so quick. So you can see that this is way off. It's crooked, and I need a straight line on the bottom, just like on my sides. I'll hold this down a little bit better. Be a little more careful to get my straight edge. Okay. So we know that we're going to need a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now if I was to take this, and we're going to do 45-degree angles, if I was to take this, let me get this adjusted around so I'm getting it. Wait, my goodness, I gotta move that mat over, it's in my way. So if I was to take this and line up my 45-degree angle, and with this ruler I have my 45 degrees up here and I have my 60 degrees down here. On some rulers you will have them go like this. Some will give you more degree choices when you're trying to get sharper points and different sizes. So this one has like 15, 30, 45, and 60, and 90. 90 is your straight. So we're going to be working with 45. And so it does the same thing on the other side of the ruler. So you can flip your ruler and get your degrees going in different directions. Let me see. There's that one. I'm going to be getting a new one of those as well. And this larger ruler has the 45 going this way. It has 60 coming out over here and over here. And then it has my 30 and my other 30. So this one, it branches out from one corner and from this corner. And then it has a lighter ruling for them down here. So it just depends on the ruler. Creative Grids does it this way, where it starts at a corner and starts at a corner. Different brands are going to have them set up differently on the ruler. Some will have more than others. This ruler just has the 45 at one side and then the 60 at the other side. So we're going to start with the 45. Now if I was to line this up with my 45 like so, get some of this stuff out of my way. Gotta get my sleeve out of my way. Okay, so if I was to line this up from the edge with my 45 line going across my top, I'm really starting to wish I had done this with cardboard. So if I was to get this right up against the ruler, the corner of my piece, and then get my 45 inch at the top, that line. So my 45 is going across up here, and say I put this with the corner here and I do my cut. It's not going to, when I get done and I sew my two triangles together, I will not come out with a HST, the color that, the size that I want it. The size will not be proper because I know that I need to have a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So if I was to sew this on the 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to end up with a much smaller block than I originally wanted. So we know that we need a 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to line this up and I'm going to mark my 1/4 of an inch here just so that you'll be able to visually see it. I'm hoping, let me see. Yeah, I'm just trying to adjust this so that I'm making sure that you're going to be able to see. I'm going to bring my camera down just a little bit more. And I'll have to check this after to make sure that this all got in here. So I have my 1/4 of an inch marked on my paper. This is my 1/4 of an inch line. I'm going to set my ruler so that my 45 degree goes up here. But where I want to set my corner down here, my corner down here needs to be be matched up with a 1/4 of an inch mark on my ruler. Not the edge of the ruler, at the 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to want that 1/4 of an inch to be sitting right directly on this corner, so that when I make my cut, which I'm going to show you with a line at the moment once I get this set up, I will have my 1/4 of an inch here, and I will have my 1/4 of an inch here, and I will have a perfect HST. So let me just get this adjusted so that both lines match up. Okay, so I have my 45 going this way. I have my 1/4 of an inch sitting right at this very corner, and I can make my cut. So now I have a perfect HST. If I was to do this with fabric, if I was to do them individually, which sometimes I do them this way so that I can chain piece, which, like I said, I'll be showing you chain piecing in a later video. But if I was to chain piece these together, I would have 2 pieces of fabric, 2.5 inches strips cut. I would lay them right side to right side, and then I would have, you know, gotten my straight edge on the end, and then I would be doing my cuts. Now, when you're doing angles, you do have to think a little bit more if you don't have angle rulers and you're individually cutting them. And sometimes that's what we have to do, because we can't afford all the different kinds of rulers, because we're trying to put together, you know, in the beginning, when you're trying to put everything together, what you need is your 6-inch by 24-inch to be able to cut, you know, across the mat. I like this one to have over at my table. So now I'm going to take this, because I want you to see, I'm going to line up that bottom edge with my 1/4 of an inch. Get it over here a little bit more so it goes directly to my edge. And I just want to make sure that I've lined this up. And I'm going to draw my line for you. And you can see that the end of this, and you'll see this on many of your angle rulers, will have a blunt edge, a straight edge on one side. And this is just a little bit wider, but when this is sewed together, it's going to come out to your 2 inches. So if I'm to take my ruler and measure it straight across from seam allowance to seam allowance, it's exactly 2 inches. So you just want to remember, you have to think a little bit harder about how you're doing it, but you want to make sure that you're getting your seam allowance from the bottom. You're going to be, let me flip my paper back around the way that I had it. I'll mess myself up. So I knew that I needed my 1/4 of an inch. Now you don't have to draw this on fabric. You just need to know that this corner down here needs to line up with the 1/4 inch, not the edge of your fabric. So I put my 45-degree line up here, and I made sure that on this corner that it lined up. I have to adjust this a couple times to get it right where I want it, of course. And you would do this on, it's easier on fabric than it is on paper, believe me. But you want this corner to not be on the edge, but on your 1/4 inch mark. And you want that little pick in your corner to line right up with that 1/4 inch there, and your straight line for your 45-inch, and you'll come out with your nice HST. So this is a 45-degree triangle. Okay, So if I wanted to do a diamond, let me think about this a little bit. All right, we'll just start over down this end. Oh, wait a minute, I should have my 45 degree here. Yeah, so I've already got my 45 degree angle here from doing my triangle. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from that corner up here down to here. So I just put my paper up against it and I'm going to measure. It's slipping underneath. All the troubles you don't think about before you go to do the video. So from the top up here down to the pick of this corner over here measures 3.5 inches. So I'm going to take my ruler and my paper, which would normally be fabric, of course, and I'm going to take this very corner up here and I'm going to lay it right at the 3.5 and get that lined up. Or you can also, well, with this ruler I can't really flip it around and get my measurement, so I'm just going to do, my line is right here at 3.5 and I've got my edge over here. I'm going to mark my edge like so. And you can even go about, if you wanted to, you could butt your little pick from your cut down there up to your 3.5 mark and make a little mark there. And if we connected from here to here, we would get our angle. So what I'm going to do is, I want this 45 degree line to be on the top, lined up. And I'm going to want the corner of my ruler to be on that dash that I made for the 3.5 inches. And once I get that lined up right, okay, so now I have that lined up right, I can go ahead and make my cut. And I have a 45 degree diamond. And sometimes I've done these the size that I need them with cardboard, mind you. Sometimes using cereal boxes, sometimes using boxes that come in the mail. You get so many, we get so many shipments nowadays from different places that I've always got cardboard around to use. So often I'll cut these as a template and use them as a template. Okay, so now just to show you that this measures out right, I'm going to do my 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. Whoops. Darn paper's so thin. But I didn't want to waste any fabric for this. And the paper helps you to be able to see it really well, so. To see the markings on the ruler. That one lined up. And this side lined up. And there you go. I have my diamond. And then, let me see. I have to get this straight. Trying to get it so that the paper's straight. But from seam allowance to seam allowance, and you have to visualize this would, wait a minute, like this. This would have been a straight piece if I had my piece up here. We'll just imagine that's there. You can see that, you know, I have to, in order to check my 2 inches, I'm making sure that this is straight in the way that it, you know, it would be going from side to side. And I've got my 2 inches. So this is my 45-degree diamond. This is my 45-degree triangle, or for an HST. And so that's those. Now I'm just going to check that my piece is 2.5 inches, since this was the bottom piece, and it is. I know the bottom of this is supposed to be straight, but I'm just going to double check and make sure that it's straight down there, and I do have a straight edge, so I'm good to go. Oh, my leg's bothering me at the moment. Standing up for a long time. Okay, I'm going to put my mark there for my seam allowance, just so that you can see it. And now I'm going to be using the 60 degree. And I could do 60 degree this way so that my cut would go that way. Or I can do 60 degree this way and my cut would go that way. It just depends on what size we're cutting and which direction we want it to go in. So we would do one in one direction, and then we would be able to move our ruler and do one in the other direction, so that we can keep going across the width of our fabric to get the cuts that we're needing. Okay, so now we're going to be working with the 60 degree, like I was saying. And with the 60 degree, it's going to be just a tad different. And I'll show you that in a second, but we're going to get our first 60 degree cut going, and then I'll show you how it's going to be a little bit different. I gotta find my line here at the top, and I wanna let me see, I'm gonna probably do it from this direction. Dun, dun. Let's get this paper so that it adjusts under here the way that I want it to adjust. My ruler has those stickies on the bottom, so it doesn't want to go where I want it to go. It does not like to slide because of the little grippets on the bottom. Now in fabric, I'd be able to move it a little bit easier, but with paper, not so much. Okay, so I have that lined up. I'm going to get my first cut. which will be my 45, or my 60-degree cut. See if I get this right. I haven't done this for a little while with the 60 degrees. I have a 60-degree ruler that I cheat and use. So now, let me see. I have to think a little bit harder when I'm so I don't forget, we're going to be measuring. Let me get it down to the 1 so I can show you how I'm measuring it. So I'm going to measure, once again, from the end of my ruler there down to the tip over here. And that tip is laying at the, whoops, I slab my paper. My tip down here is right at the 7/8. So I have 2 7/8. And I'm going to go across up here. And I'm going to bring this corner here to the 7/8 on my ruler. So I have, get my paper to slip up there where I want it to be. So from the end of the ruler there up to this corner, and I'm measuring up to this corner at the 7/8. So I have 1, I have 2, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 eighths. I'm going to make my little mark here. And then I got it. Oops, wait a minute. Yeah, okay, that was for my measuring. I get it back down to my 60-degree. And you'll have to excuse me for just a moment because I have to think about the direction that I'm wanting to cut in. Not that way. I'm wanting to cut in this direction. There we go. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to get it so it's on the 60-degree line. I think I need to do it from this side. Actually, let me see. We'll see in a minute if I did this right. I don't know. That's not going to be right. Wait a minute. A lot of extra thinking that goes in with this. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. I needed this side of the 60 degrees so I get it perfectly right. And then I can make my cut. And I have my 60-degree diamond. And it does take some extra thinking and flipping your ruler around. So when I had it like this and I was, I had measured across and I wanted to get my cut this way, I needed to make sure that my ruler was going in the right direction, because if I would have used the 60-degree line from here instead, I would have ended up with a half a diamond. And we did not want that. So it's just a matter of stopping and thinking about how you're arranging your ruler. This isn't something that I do very often. And I'm going to make my 1/4-inch lines for you. so that you can see how this is measuring up. And it is possible, very possible, to make your different shapes that you need to make when you're cutting for different patterns using your ruler in this way. But it is some math and it is some thinking about. So if I'm to have my paper straight and I measure across with the right side, and I don't know if it would be my 2 inches. I may not have made my lines perfectly right, but that's to give you the idea of how you would do your cuts. And you can do your equilateral diamonds with this as well, using your 60 degrees. And then, like I said, some rulers have you 30 degrees, some rulers have you 15 degrees. I don't really ever use them. I rarely use my degree lines anymore. I used to use them a lot more because I didn't have my angle rulers that I now have, which I have found to be so much helpful for me. I've made a couple of quilts now, which I've posted pictures on before. This is your, let me just lift my camera up a little bit more here. This is your 60 degree ruler, and they come in 2 sizes. This is the 8.5 inch triangle, 60 degree triangle. I think the other one is 12.5 inches. Don't count me 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure the larger one is 12.5 inches. This is a smaller one at 8.5 inches. And I think you might be able to get an even smaller one at 6.5 inches. For me, because, you know, you have your lines for your measurements, it's pretty easy to figure it all up with my lines and whatnot. And we'll be going over this ruler a little bit later on. I'll show you how to make some 60 degree triangle blocks coming up in a later tutorial. But now that I have some of my different angled rulers, it's a little easier for me to make my cuts, my triangles and whatnot. And I have some other angle rulers that throughout the years, the newest, latest famous ruler comes out, and I've grabbed a bunch of them over the years. Some I have found very useful. Some rulers that I've tested out, I have found they were not as useful as I thought they were going to be, and I'm slowly getting rid of them and replacing them with more useful rulers. And I really love the Creative Grids rulers, and one of the reasons why is because every one of the Creative Grid rulers gives you your code. And when you put your phone on camera or your PC on camera and you go over this code, it will bring up a link for you to go to a tutorial on that specific ruler. They do an outstanding job of teaching you how to use every one of your rulers. And when I get my squared up 12.5 by 12.5, it will be really nice because once again it has that code that I can go to, and I can look at the video if I needed to and find out how to use that ruler. It will teach you about the markings. It will teach you how to line it up. It teaches you a lot about your ruler. And I really love Creative Grid rulers for that reason. I love Creative Grid rulers because they have your dots for holding them in place. They stay in place. They don't slide all over the place with just a little bit of pressure. You don't have to push hard, just a little bit of a pressure wherever they have the dots and whatnot, and my ruler doesn't slip. I've got nice clean markings. They have it so that all of my, my inch and my half inch is all marked out for me across. The only thing that I really want to mention about rulers is to make sure when you're using a half-inch ruler, which this one is 6.5 inches. So when I go to measure with my ruler, if I'm wanting to get 6 inches, I have to pay attention because I have this half mark on the end. So say I want to go across, and one of the quickest ways, this is just an extra tip, but one of the quickest ways to cut out strips for me, let me get my paper situated here, is say I need 3 2-inch strips. I know that if I start at this side, I can cut 3 2-inch strips very quickly by starting at the furthest side and working my way over. However, if you have a ruler like this one that has an extra half inch on the end, which is very handy if I need to have squares that are going to end up being 6 inches, then I can just, go all the way over to the edge over here, and I can do my cut, and I know I'm going to have 6.5 inches. But if I'm going to make 3 2-inch cuts, I have to remember to move my ruler so that it lines up with the edge of my fabric on the 1/2 inch. Then I can make my cut. Then I can move this over to the 2-inch or 2.5 inch mark over here. Make my cut. Then I go to the 4.5 inch mark. Whoops. And make my cut. And I end up with my 3 2-inch strips that I needed. It's just a quicker way to move across your fabric to get those strips instead of going, 2 inches, take that off, go to 2 inches, line it up, take that off. It's just quicker if I start with my first cut by starting, over here and working my way across, and then I can just take all 3 pieces out. That's just one of the things that I do. I hope that this tutorial has been helpful in learning how to read your ruler. One other thing that I did want to point out. Before we go on here, once in a great while, a pattern will say to cut something so it's on the 16th. So we have 8/8 in an inch. So you have 16/16 of an inch. And those are between, and you have very rare rulers that will show you your 16ths markings. Very, very rare. Now, Quilters Select does show you the 16ths, and they do it with dots in between. And that can be helpful if you need to cut something that is, say, 3 and, say 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5/16. So then on this on these little tiny dashes between, I'm able to get my 16ths, which is one of the ways that they taught me. Was if your ruler doesn't have the 16ths, you would guesstimate your fabric between 2 2/8 and line it up. And I use, sometimes when I have to do something like that, I will use some pieces of tape. Now, washi tape works a lot better. I looked around and I'm out of washi tape. I haven't used it in a while. But I also have this ruler tape, which is very see-through. And I will put it just on the outside of a line where I'm going to need it. And this makes it easier for me if I have to do a guesstimate between 2/8 so I can get a 1/16. I can set this between, and I can see if I'm getting it halfway between the two lines so that I can get my 1/16. The Quilter Select rulers are the only one that really, that I'm sure that there might be some other ones out there that have the markings for it, but I'm not sure if the Creative Grids, I think the Creative Grids has a similar dash system so that you can pick up your 1/16, but we don't use that very often. It's not something that you're going to have to worry about very often in a design and a pattern, putting it together. So I wouldn't be over concerned with that. But that is one of the rulers that does it and comes in handy. And if I was to recommend, you know, if you're starting out in the quilting world and you're trying to decide what rulers do I need, let me just adjust the camera just a little bit more here. So one of the most important rulers that you'll get will be your 6 by 24 inch long. And that's because most mats are 36 by 24 inches. So you would want this to go across your mat. This mat that I have down on my table is, let me see, it is 28 inches wide. So I'm able to not always have to line up my fabric on the very bottom line. I can move it up some so that, you know, my ruler can line up on the bottom and I don't have to start on my edge. So when I'm cutting fabric, and we'll pretend this is my folded fabric, and this is my fold at the bottom. I usually will start up about 1/2 inch and line that line up with my fold, and I will start cutting from the bottom here up to my fabric. And it just helps me to get a cleaner line without trying to start it at the edge. And if you have your ruler flat at the edge, what happens is when you go to cut, sometimes this little corner doesn't get cut well, or you nick your ruler, and you end up with a ruler that has a whole bunch of nicks on the corners of them. So one of your primary rulers would be a 6 or a 6.5 inch wide ruler by 24 inches long. That's one of your most important ones. I do like to have a couple of skinnier rulers. These aren't absolutely necessary. I just like to have them. I like to have the small one by Creative Grids. This is just a 6 by 1 inch. I find them very handy for doing my diagonal lines, for just doing small lines, getting my 1/4 of an inch, stuff like that. So I keep this over by my sewing machine, so I have that handy. I also like to have a thinner ruler that is, let me see, it's 1 inch by, I think this is 18 inches long. I just keep this so, wait a minute, is that 1 inch? No, it's 1.5 inch, sorry. So this one's 1.5 inch by 18 inches long, and it just helps me when I'm over at my table if I need to do a little bit of a longer cut over there. I have a couple different mats. I have a turntable mat, and I have a smaller regular mat over there that I use. And I used to use this more often. This stays hung up quite a bit, but it can come in handy. But what really is handy is to have that, have a smaller ruler, sometimes 2 inches wide by your 6 inches wide, or 12 inches long by 2 inches. I find that a little bit more handy. I can't figure out where I put that one at the moment. Your 6 or 6.5 inch wide by your 24 inch long. This one here, I had bought it way back in, I don't know, I've had this one for so many years, I can't even tell you when I got it. The reason why I had bought it was because it literally told me my 8s over here. So it was kind of a cheat for me. I don't use this one very often. I'll use it for some quick cuts over at my sewing table. The only reason why I've kept it is because it's shorter and it's my 6.5 inches, and since it's smaller, it's easier to keep at my sewing machine table. Eventually I'm going to change that out with the Creative Grids. I really love my Creative Grid rulers. They give me a lot more markings. They hold down better. They don't slip and slide. But you have what you have when you have it, and when you know better and you learn better, that's when sometimes you get the better stuff. And if you're new, then you're getting, the information now that your Creative Grid rulers are, to me, your very best ruler. To me, my second best ruler is my Quilter Select rulers. They have this film on the bottom that you can perfectly see well when it's laying down, but it also, it doesn't slip when you put a little pressure on it. However, I find just a tad more slipping with that one than I would with my Creative Grids. My Creative Grids just won't move. So I really like those quite a bit. I like to have a 6x6 or a 5x5 around my sewing table for quickly going about squaring up HSTs, your half square triangles rather, and some other small blocks. It's just handy to have these over at my sewing table to do that. I have my 12.5 by 12.5 for squaring up larger blocks, and then I have my 20.5 by 20.5 to square up much larger blocks. And I don't use that as, I don't make a lot of large blocks. 12.5 is usually my largest, which is a finished 12 inch, of course. But I do like that larger square because when I'm doing a quilt, it makes it a lot more handy. I have a lot more squaring off on my corners, so I have less on my sides that I have to square up. And I've got a lot more rulers that I'll talk about at a later time. A lot of beautiful Creative Grid rulers for making blocks with, and so forth, and I'm going to do those in a later tutorial. But I hope that this has been helpful for you today. I hope it's given you some extra information, some extra insight on how to read your rulers, how to use those diagonal lines on your rulers. I know when I first started out, those diagonal lines were just a mystery to me. I couldn't figure out how the heck would you use them, what are they for, why are they on my ruler. I felt like they were in my way. And frustrated me in the beginning. And then when I got to doing HSTs, using diamonds, different shapes in patterns, I realized, oh wow, that's what they're for. And back then I couldn't afford to have so many different rulers. I've collected these I've been collecting rulers over 30 years now. So some more useful than others. Some I'm replacing out because I don't like the older ruler. They didn't have the nice non-slip on them, which I find very handy and I like having a lot better. and I will change them out as time goes on. But hands down, the majority of my rulers in my house are creative grids. That's just my preference. Everybody has their own preference. Well, I hope that you have learned. I hope that you've enjoyed the tutorial. We are Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry. If this has been helpful for you, if you've liked the tutorial, please stop and like this video and subscribe to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. You'll really enjoy it. We have a lot more coming up. I'm going to be doing a basic apron tutorial later on. I'm going to be doing some bally bowls. I'm going to be doing some bags. I'm going to be doing how to insert zippers into tote bags and purses, to have your little pouches inside, to have card holders inside of tote bags. So many more tutorials coming up. We have another gal that's been doing 2 blocks each month, so after 6 months you'll have enough blocks to make a full quilt top. We have a lot going on, and we hope that you'll come back and view us again. You have a great day. Happy sewing.